شباب بلادي في مداين وبوادي،
شباب بلادي في مداين وبوادي،
بلادنا تنادينا وتدير اللوم علينا،
بلادنا تنادينا وتدير اللوم علينا،
بالذل اللي شربينا والهم اللي مبكينا، والهم اللي مبكينا. شباب بلادي في مداين وبوادي،
شباب بلادي في مداين وبوادي،
بلادنا تنادينا وتدير اللوم علينا،
بلادنا تنادينا وتدير اللوم علينا،
بالذل اللي شربينا والهم اللي مبكينا، والهم اللي مبكينا.
Libyan people were tired and angry of how Gaddafi was treating them. Gaddafi was portrayed as malicious and not caring for anyone but himself. Gaddafi went to great lengths to stay in power, but the Libyan rebels had had enough. I will describe to you how two different newspapers in two different regions of the world analyzed the Libyan revolution and its effect on Libyan citizens and the world. Libya was in a state of conflict. Gaddafi went to extreme measures to try and control his people. When Gaddafi was named ruler of Libya, he laid out a pan-Arab, anti-imperialist philosophy blended with aspects of Islam. Gaddafi allowed private control over small companies, but the government controlled larger ones. Throughout the revolt, Gaddafi went as far as to shut down the internet from his citizens. Citizen journalists had to find ways to sneak around Gaddafi's power to get their stories out to the public. Gaddafi supported independence activities against colonial rule around the world. Gaddafi was also accused of oppressing the citizens of Libya in any civil activities. I used two different news sources. One of my news sources was the New York Times, which gave a summary of events in the Libyan uprising. The other news source was Al Jazeera, which provided a detailed look on all the aspects of the revolution. Another source I used was citizen journalism. Much of what was posted throughout the revolt was through citizens of Libya, who took videos of what was happening throughout the battles. This source gives the public a better outlook of what was going on in the country at that exact time. The coverage in the New York Times described the liberation after years of Gaddafi's dictatorship. The Libyan people were fighting for their freedoms and their dignity. After Libya was liberated, the rebel groups and citizens of Libya rejoiced greatly. At the liberation ceremony, crowds were heard singing the pre-Gaddafi Libyan national anthem, which resembles the downfall of his dictatorship. The New York Times went on to describe the feeling of the ceremony. Happiness, relief, and faithfulness to Libya surrounded the ceremony. After describing the liberation, the New York Times explained now that Libya is a free country and they would need to reconstruct their government. The new Libyan constitution will reflect the Islamic religion. Regulations, national institutions, and civil life all need to be renovated after Gaddafi's period in office. Some prominent militia commanders have cautioned that they will not allow their secular counterparts in a new command to put them off to the side. Anti-Gaddafi leaders from other territories have criticized that the structure of the acting government skews greatly towards eastern Libya. Rebels argue that the Islamists have exploited the country's authority, immersing the conflict with religion. The New York Times provided people with a summary of Libyan revolution. Al Jazeera described the fight for freedom more in depth. Al Jazeera gave in-depth details of the whole journey and fight against Gaddafi and his army. On February 17th, Gaddafi's army responded by firing live ammunition at the crowds. More than a dozen protesters were killed. In the news stories, it was said that Gaddafi released prisoners from jail and paid the prisoners to join his army to fight against the rebels. Al Jazeera also focused on aspects of other countries helping Libya fight for freedom. As declared by NATO, there would be a no-fly zone being to protect innocent civilians. Al Jazeera provided its audience with a timeline of the Libyan revolt, and on October 23rd, the leader of the NTC declared the revolution had ended and Libya was now free after 8 months of fighting. Al Jazeera released statements from Obama such as, "After 4 decades of brutal dictatorship and 8 months of deadly conflict, the Libyan people can now celebrate their freedom and the beginning of a new era of promise." Al Jazeera wrote about Libya thanking their allies for supporting the uprising, such as the Arab League, the United Nations, and the European Union. As stated in articles in the Al Jazeera newspaper, it is time to embark on the process of building a democracy and hold the country's first free elections next year. Libya is encountering challenges, especially the threat from armed soldiers. Al Jazeera provided different features of every situation happening in Libya, and it provided a more gruesome take to the Libyan revolution. The Libyan people depended on citizen journalism for live updates on the issues surrounding their country. Citizen journalism was a quick and knowledgeable way for Libyans to get access to what was going on in their country. The aim of citizen journalism was to raise awareness of the horrors Gaddafi inflicted on his own people. Journalists risked their lives posting their video clips and news feeds onto YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, just to name a few social media websites. This allowed for the news to reach a wider range of people. In the New York Times, the Libyan Revolution accounts for 2 pages worth of news articles and media scripts. At the time of the revolt, more importance and emphasis was provided, but Libya became free, the articles diminished. While the Libyan uprising does affect the United States, it does not affect it to great extent to where news stories would focus primarily on the battles between Gaddafi and the rebels. Al Jazeera and citizen journalists had more than 10 pages of news coverage on the Libyan protests and uprising. I think since Al Jazeera has more of a tie to Libya in that part of the world, they focus more on the issue, and citizen journalism wanted the public to see what their country was suffering from. In the New York Times, the main issue being portrayed was the fight for freedom. Also included in the issue was the happiness and relief of Libyan citizens who have been under control of a tyrant for a great period of time. The New York Times focused on more of the aftermath in Libya. Articles were written questioning what Libya would do to restore its government. Questions were also asked about what Libyan officials would do in the meantime with no government. In Al Jazeera, the main issue being confronted was making sure the world and the Libyan people are told the honest truth of the matters going on in Libya. Al Jazeera made sure not to leave any details about Gaddafi's army and Libyan protesters. Al Jazeera and citizen journalism provided an update, if not daily then weekly, on the battles between protesters and Gaddafi's army. The New York Times focused on Libya as a whole and gave a summary of what happened throughout the Libyan revolution. Al Jazeera and citizen journalism provided a timely update on about everything that was going on, whether it be gruesome or not.